the quarterback out of Colorado, has been talked about as early as the 102, and there's some people who feel like he may fall all the way outside of the top 10 picks. Dave, you wrote the draft profile that's over at cbssports.com on Sanders. Let's hear about his strengths and weaknesses.
Well, he's definitely capable of being a good NFL quarterback. His upside is tied to improving his processing, his downfield accuracy, his rushing. But I don't view him as a force multiplier. That's the term that I use for when a quarterback makes other players around him better. And it's also vice versa, a wide receiver that can make his quarterback's numbers better. In fact, that's how I felt like it worked at Colorado, where Travis Hunter and frankly, some of his other wide receivers made Shedeur Sanders a better quarterback than he actually is. I'm concerned about his arm strength, his velocity on his throws. The basic fundamentals, things like his footwork and, poise in the pocket and his technique, but that's all great. That's been trained. You would expect something like that from a guy who's the son of a Hall of Famer. His accuracy is a huge plus, but it's really only there on short throws and intermediate throws. Did a standard job of processing in college, pre-snap versus coverage and blitzes, just wasn't consistent with it. He was basically in the same offense for 7 years, coached by his father every single one of those years. That goes back to high school, obviously. And he's, I don't know if he's capable of doing more than running kind of the spread stuff that we've seen from Colorado, where he's not checking out the entire field. Another thing that really bothers me about Shedeur is, first of all, he was in shotgun pretty much exclusively throughout all of his time playing football, college and high school anyway. And he would take like 7 steps drops from shotgun, Heath. So you're already, 4 yards from the line of scrimmage when you're in shotgun. He's going back another 5 yards. He's adding 5 yards, maybe even 7 yards to a ton of his plays. And maybe that's why he couldn't push the ball further than like 45 air yards downfield. On the rare moments where he didn't take that drop back and his offensive line provided him protection, and we can talk about that offensive line in a minute, clean pocket, didn't take that drop back, he looked great. So that's what you need to see from him on a consistent basis, and not this lackadaisical drifting that forces his throws to be even longer. He didn't have any major injury concerns. I think that he's, I guess I'm just ultimately concerned about the power of his arm, the tendency of throwing, the lack of diversity in the offenses that he's been in, and whether or not he can be anything more than a game manager or a distributor. This is a quarterback that's being compared on a lot of places, myself included, to Geno Smith. Yeah. And Geno Smith, as he developed, started to become ignorant of pass rush and making throws when the pressure's on him. And Shedeur did plenty of that too. But Geno Smith probably has a stronger arm than Shedeur Sanders. And I don't know if Shedeur can ever get a bigger arm than that. I think he would benefit from having a year on the bench and then coming into an offense when the offensive line's strong, when the receiving core is good, and he can be a good distributor of the football. That being said, it makes me nervous to be excited about him for fantasy unless he's got that great receiving core around him like we talked about. The stat that I've got is that 52.6% of his yards last year came after the catch. It's the highest rate of any quarterback prospect that's worth a damn in this draft class. So a lot of Travis Hunter and all the other receivers that are there. Jimmy Horn's one of them. The Westerham, I think is how you say it. Westerkamp, I'm not exactly sure, but that dude was making plays. Colorado's receivers bailed him out a decent amount last year and made Shedeur Sanders' numbers look better than they actually were.
So it's interesting because I've kind of viewed it as the wide receivers helped Shedeur Sanders a lot. The offensive line hurt Shedeur Sanders a lot.
Yeah, that's very true.
But I think Dan, one of the more interesting things with him versus Ward is that we really don't know like the who or the where within the first round. I don't think this is going to be a guy who falls out of the first round. But let's just say hypothetically that Shedeur Sanders is going to be a top 15 pick. How much does it matter to you when we're evaluating him a month from now if that's number 2 overall or if he falls to pick 15.
It makes a massive difference. We know this from just NFL history, right? Like Will Levis, a player who was considered maybe going in first round, ends up falling to the second round, top of it, and he's out already. They're not even going to move forward with him. But a player who's selected at number 3 overall, if he does go to the Giants there, or 2 to the Browns, that's going to be a guy who gets a lot of opportunities to be successful, depending on, obviously, the hierarchy. And I think you always do a great job of breaking this down, Heath. But like in the Giants case, it's a very weird scenario. If they draft Shedeur, they could still fire the GM and coach this coming off season. And then it's like, okay, maybe he doesn't have as long a leash. In the Browns situation, it seems like they're keeping those guys in place. So we would have a longer leash, which is obviously hard for us to predict, but very important. But as far as draft capital goes, it makes a massive difference because they're going to hold on to a player a lot longer if they invest a lot to create to draft that player.
I just assume that if the Giants, maybe I should just say after, but if the Giants draft Sanders and have a terrible year and fire Brian Dable, then Shedeur Sanders is going to have the longest leash in the history of leashes because Deion Sanders is going to be the coach of the New York Giants. Dan doesn't like that plan. Dave, I wonder, like I know you're a little bit more negative than consensus on Sanders. There may have been a little bit more weaknesses than strengths in your evaluation. So I'm going to challenge you just a little bit. Is there any chance that he is someday a top 12 dynasty quarterback? And what does that path look like?
Yeah, there's absolutely a chance that happens. Let's say he goes to the Giants. The Giants bulk up their offensive line. The Giants replace the likes of Slayton or Wan'Dale Robinson with another really nice receiver that forces defenses to not just double team Malik Neighbors time after time. I think that in conjunction with, I don't want to say a better play caller than Brian Dable, because I think Dable is still a good play caller, but maybe somebody who can develop the quarterback's, skills and bring them up to the level of the pro game, where Sanders can be a better processor of coverage. That would encourage me. But I ultimately believe that Sanders isn't a guy that can get the job done on his own. We saw evidence time after time that Cam Ward was that guy. He led Miami to a ton of comeback victories last year because their defense stunk, their run game sometimes sputtered. Cam Ward was the reason why they won a lot of games. I don't know how many times we can go back and say Shedeur Sanders won the Buffaloes a lot of games. And maybe sometimes he did, but it could have also been Hunter more so than Sanders, if you know what I'm saying. The catches that are over the middle that the receivers take all the way. And then just the last thing on Sanders, if you're questioning whether or not he's good at processing, please find a way to watch his game against BYU. It's his last college game. That's a defense that changed their blitzes before the snap. They rotated their coverages before the snap, or right at the snap, I should say. They made it hell on Shedeur Sanders.
Yep.
And that was scary film for me to see. And that's what he's going to see more of every single week in the National Football League. So that's the progress he has to make. He's got to have a coach that really teaches him how to process better. But if he gets that, and he's got a good line, and he's got another receiver other than somebody of the caliber of Neighbors, boom, you're talking about a guy who could be a top 10 to 12 fantasy QB.
And I have a few thoughts on Sanders I just want to get out before we move on to the next player, Heath. It's interesting because I really am aligned in a lot of ways with Dave. I wanted to like Shedeur Sanders a lot because the Giants desperately need a quarterback, and it just was difficult for me. I think, watching this offense so extensively, it's Pat Shurmur who's the offensive coordinator. And I was reminded in a lot of ways of what I saw in 2019 when he worked with Daniel Jones. What he did a lot of the time was simplify the offense with half-field high-low reads. And so there are moments where Sanders will hit an inbreaker behind the defense for 15 yards, and it looks like, wow, this guy processed the play really well, and he threw with a lot of anticipation. And that's supposed to be Sanders' calling card, right? He's not overly athletic. He doesn't have a big arm. So he's supposed to win with his mind and with being an excellent anticipatory thrower and processor. But I know those plays because I watched them with Daniel Jones, and they're not, in my opinion, examples of high-level anticipation and processing. When I watch Cam Ward, see actual examples of high-level anticipation and processing, creative throws. Sanders is more robotic, in my opinion, in how he plays the position at that school. And they didn't ask a lot of him. Dave brought it up with his, with the stat, which was amazing. 56.6% of the yards came after the catch. It's why I don't like that completion percentage. So many screen throws, so many simple solutions that were good. They were smart by Shurmur to run, but look, are they really an example of something we can translate to the NFL level. And I think the offensive line thing is a bit overblown because of what Dave said. The drifting in the pocket from Sanders is really, really, if he continues to do that, let's just say this, he will never make it in the NFL. Because when you drift like he does in the pocket backwards, you create different angles for the pass rushers that are really advantageous to them. It is a really bad thing. So as the offensive line gets killed, despite having a former NFL offensive line coach that offensive line, who obviously that's not something every college program has, you can look at the tape and say, well, the times where he doesn't drift in the pocket, the offensive line holds up, and the numbers back that up. And so that's what he has to be. He has to be a player, in my opinion, who does a better job of staying in the pocket, not drifting. And when he's able to hitch into his throws, I have no questions about his arm talent or arm strength. It's when he's forced to go off platform that he doesn't have the torque to generate the arm power. Specifically to his left, you'll see this on tape. There are a lot of balls that when he's moving out of the pocket and throwing to his left, die down as they get to the receiver. They'll bounce to the receiver on the outs. And that's something that really scares me about Sanders moving forward. It's something that I just can't get out of my head. And then this is the stat that we'll end it on this, but this is a stat that will always really scare me about Sanders. And because it was a stat that showed up for Daniel Jones during his time at Duke. And I really think it defined his career in a lot of ways. And it's the average air yards to the first down marker. Sanders was minus 1.8 average air yards to the first down marker. That ranked 132nd among 147 qualifying quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons. What does that tell me? That tells me that when he gets pressure and when he's blitzed, the solutions that he's finding are the checkdowns underneath, relying on yards after the catch. That just doesn't work at the NFL level. I watched it with Jones. I watched it with other quarterbacks. You have to be able to stand in that pocket and throw down the field. It's not like there's no examples of this on his tape, but it's the total outcome, 132nd out of 147. If he can't run and he can't escape that way and he can't throw off platform, he has to be able to do a better job of finding solutions down the field when the blitz comes.